captured leader will appear in a New York federal court to face charges of narco-terrorism. President Donald Trump said that the United States is in charge of Venezuela and will run the country until there is a judicious transition. However, Secretary of State Marco Rubio suggested that the U.S. would not take a day-to-day role in governing Venezuela. Rubio clarified that U.S. would continue to enforce the existing oil quarantine and push for policy changes. Trump also said U.S. will take back oil from Venezuela and claimed major oil companies will be spending money to build infrastructure.
All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military working with U.S. law enforcement successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
Let's now focus on what it means for oil prices. A major shift was not expected because Venezuela is a member of OPEC, so its production is already accounted for there. Oil prices inched higher after a weekend sell-off. Venezuela is home to the world's largest proven oil reserves with an estimated 303 billion barrels. This is more than Saudi Arabia, Iran or any other major oil-producing nation. However, the country lacks oil infrastructure needed to ramp up the output. Oil analytics firm Kepler estimates investments of over $160 billion will be needed to bolster the output to nearly 2 million barrels per day over the next 3 years. Now, let's understand what U.S.'s actions mean for Latin America and the world. Trump administration seems to be embracing its old policy of interventionism, making Venezuela's neighbors nervous. Soon after Maduro's extraction, Trump issued a warning to Colombia's president, saying he needs to watch his back. But Gustavo Petro gave a sharp retort, saying he's not a narco and is ready to take up arms to protect his country. Trump also claimed that Cuba was on the brink of collapse while accusing drug cartels of dominating Mexico, suggesting the U.S. may need to intervene in both cases. Colombia and Cuba and Mexico all have condemned the United States. Brazil went further, saying Washington had crossed an unacceptable line. Beyond Latin America, Trump has repeated threats to seize Greenland, raising fresh concerns among United States allies. Critics warn that such actions undermine the rules-based international order, potentially sending the wrong signal to Russia and China, as Moscow continues its military campaign in Ukraine and Beijing seeks to assert its claims over Taiwan. China and Russia called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations, alleging an act of aggression by the U.S. The question now is whether U.S. actions risk normalizing the use of force and eroding respect for international law. Joining us right now is Navtej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to the United States, the UK and Israel, and Deepak Bhojwani, former Indian ambassador to Venezuela and Colombia and Latin American countries. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Ambassador Sarna, how does this help United States and Donald Trump at this point? Clearly, this is something that will create distrust among allies and even those in the Gulf. Even OPEC will not be able to believe Donald Trump or trust the U.S. under Donald Trump over the next few years.
Thank you, Parikshit. Pleasure being here along with Deepak. I don't think Mr. Trump is looking for approval from anybody. He has done what he's been wanting to do for several weeks and months. And as details of the very complex operation emerge, you can see that it's been in planning for quite a while. I think at a very quick analysis, this is something which he's implementing what he's called the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, or as people are now calling it, the Donroe Doctrine. Basically, that in the Western Hemisphere, he will do whatever he wants. And clearly, he's been wanting Maduro out not for the purposes that are there for public consumption, that is ensuring human rights and democracy, but essentially for the resources, which is essentially the oil resources. He's made it clear that they will run Venezuela, and I don't think he means it in day-to-day governance. He means it in the fact that they will run Venezuela's resources by sending U.S. oil majors back into that country. We'll have to see how this goes in the days to come. The day after is not at all clear. There are many different scenarios. and we will have to see what happens. But at one go, I think Donald Trump has given the killer blow to international institutions, international law, something which he has had scant respect for in any case.
That's indeed important, and there is a UN Security Council meeting later today, and one really wonders what will really emerge from there either. Ambassador Bhojwani, just a month back on CNBC TV 18, you had said that whatever Donald Trump was trying in Venezuela, they had carried out strikes at that time on certain drug boats, and you had said that this was clearly an attempt to take over Venezuelan oil reserves, maybe carried out a regime change. All of that has happened. But will taking over Venezuelan oil reserves be easy? Can they do so overnight?
Parikshit, I think there are a couple of things here. First of all, I don't think the US is interested in really taking over in terms, as Navtej said, the day-to-day governance of the country. They are interested in regaining their lost influence in Venezuela. Venezuela, as you know, since over 2 decades, has moved away from the US influence and has radically opposed US presence in the Caribbean and elsewhere. It has co-opted Russia and China in a way, militarily also, and also economically, because China today buys the majority of 70% of the oil that Venezuela produces, which is very low compared to what it could produce. But nevertheless, so the US has primarily seen this as a strategic problem. Secondly, they needed an in because their majors, the Exxon, ConocoPhillips, etc., had been threatened by Hugo Chavez, who had raised royalties and so on and so forth, and they opted out of the country. Hugo Chavez then expropriated the wells and their concessions, and they've been fighting legally now for 2 decades without any success. So what Trump has done in one fell swoop, he's got rid of a so-called thorn on his side, Nicolas Maduro, who basically, by getting the military to back him and the militias that his predecessor Hugo Chavez had created, he's managed to stay in power, okay, by hook, mainly by crook, actually, we can all say that. Now the thing is that Trump wants American companies to get back in. Why does he want Venezuelan oil when there's so much oil already being produced? He's trying to reduce the purchases that any country makes from Russia, so Venezuela can offer an option. And in fact, our foreign minister had said so in so many words, that you're blocking us off from Venezuelan oil, Iranian oil, and now you're going to block us off from Russian oil. Now, if this opens up, what will happen, in my opinion, is that first of all, the US companies that were kicked out, literally out of Venezuela, will be allowed to go back in, make and recoup their losses, and get production moving again. And after that, we'll see what it really means. First of all, I think they will never tolerate a government that is in any way hostile or even inimical to US interests. So let's see how far that goes.
Right. Ambassador Sarna, coming back to you, do you think this current interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, can she put together a strong counterattack against Donald Trump? Will Venezuela, under the present government, stand up to US pressure, or are they going to give in? Because we hear varying remarks and reports.
I think it's very unclear, Parikshit, at this stage, because this is the former vice president, and she basically has
also the oil minister.
And the oil minister, and shown loyalty to Maduro, but she seems to have a kind of clearance as far as Trump is concerned, because he's at the moment come down against the Nobel Prize winning other candidate, who logically one would have expected that if Venezuela is going to move towards democracy and protection of human rights and so on, would have been the choice. But that's not what Trump wants. So at the moment, you have a very complex situation there, where you have people who have been supporting Maduro, who are still in many ways supporting Maduro, and are sort of there for the moment. How the internal rivalry between the former vice president, the interior minister, and the defense minister pans out. These are three very strong figures there. We will have to see, and whether there's going to be, an upsurge of protest against Maduro and all his cronies. That also is one option, but that doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. So it's very difficult to see where this is going to go at the moment.
Right. Coming back to the implications for India, Ambassador Bhojwani, OVL had stakes there. Of course, we were not importing much from Venezuela since the sanctions were put into effect. The oil embargo was put into effect in 2023. And even the oil production via OVL has been quite low. But do you think if the US lifts sanctions on Venezuela, OVL will be able to make good on its losses? We believe that the losses are somewhere to the tune of $500 million. And if their revenues increase, they could secure something like $1 billion.
Yeah, look, Parikshit, the thing is that OVL's presence dates back about 15 years after Chavez came to India on his visit and signed up. And he was trying very much to attract India's attention. In fact, he wanted to have a strategic relationship, which we wisely avoided because it would have been a red rag for the West. Now, the thing is that, of course, their oil reserves are something which we definitely want to be involved with, not only because they're so vast, but also because our refineries, mainly the Reliance refineries, but now increasingly also our public sector refineries, have engineered and tooled up to refine the heavy crude, which is very cheap. See, when you have cheaper crude, $1 per barrel makes a huge difference. We import 7 million barrels a day. Now, can you imagine how much that means? It means $7 million if you get a discount on one barrel. So the point I'm making is that OVL will definitely look at this as an opportunity, and their shares have risen recently. Reliance, which has been importing at peak about 400,000 barrels a day till the sanctions kicked in, and thereafter in trickles also, they are tooled up for Venezuelan crude, and they've been making a lot of money in terms of refining margins, despite the freight costs from that distance. So it's a tremendous win-win for India. If sanctions are lifted on the export of Venezuelan crude. Now, what does that mean? It's possible, in fact, I would say probable, I could be wrong, that the Americans will first say, look, our companies are going in, you can have joint ventures with them, but instead of the Venezuelan oil company, PDVSA, the state oil company, we'll have our companies exploiting that oil and they'll sell it to you. So what will the price be? Secondly, if they're only going to allow exports or whether they'll allow concessionaires like OVL and others. We have a 40% stake in San Cristobal, which was producing over 100,000, maybe 200,000 a day. Now we have another concession in Carabobo, which is even bigger. But the problem is that these fields have either been shut down or they're producing oil that goes to China and we're not being paid for it. So OVL has $500 million plus outstanding, and even accounts haven't been settled as yet. So there's a lot that's going on, and if we can get to even import Venezuelan crude at a discount, that would be a start.
All right. That, of course, would be, as you said, would be a big win-win for both Indian public sector and private oil companies. We're taking a short break, but I'll request both Ambassador Sarna and Ambassador Bhojwani to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newscentre. We're discussing the implications of Washington's actions in Venezuela. Reports suggest that a US-led restructuring of Venezuela's oil sector could be beneficial for India. It could potentially help India recover nearly $1 billion in long-pending payments and restart crude production from oil fields operated by Indian companies. India used to be one of the largest buyers of Venezuelan crude, but this came to a halt when US imposed sanctions on Venezuela in 2020. Let me go back to our guests right now. We have Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani, former Indian ambassador to Latin American countries, and Ambassador Navtej Sarna, former Indian ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Sarna, how do you see this? Economically and energy-wise, it could be a tremendous opportunity, but how should India read the developments in Venezuela? We, of course, have a lot of stakes in the Latin American region, exports from the auto sector. We're trying to have critical mineral partnerships.
Parikshit, I think, this has to be handled carefully. There are temptations to celebrate over, say, some economic gains for our oil industry. There are also constituencies, not in India, but all around the world, who are celebrating the exit of Maduro because he was known as a brutal dictator, and so on and so forth, and several million Venezuelans had to leave the country. At the same time, I think India has to keep in mind the manner of this operation, what it does to international order, what the precedents it sets for the time to come, and are we comfortable with that? Are we comfortable with the complete disregard for international law? What happens to multilateralism? What happens to predictability in relations? This is worse than regime change. It's basically leadership change, that I don't like you, so I'm removing you. And this might not stop at Venezuela. He's talked about Cuba, he's talked about Colombia, he's talked about Mexico. Statements have been issued by Greenland, anticipating what might happen there after his comments in the same context. So I think India has to balance all these things. Whether economic gains, return of assets and money of OVL, as against what it does to the fundamentals of our foreign policy, we have to stick to that. We have to stick to the fact that countries have to relate to each other in a certain way, and there's some things which are done and which are not done, and you don't just fly in and pick up the sitting head of state of a country and take him away at the only legality being of the Southern District of the Southern District Court of New York. There's no UN authority behind it. There's not even the US Congress authority behind it. And that is why opinion is quickly fracturing within the West and in the US.
Right. That's the next question that I'd like to ask you, Ambassador Sarna. What happens to the international order? You've got China. There are all reports stating that China is getting ready to invade Taiwan by 2020 or early or even in 2026. Russia has already not... the Russian war has been going on for 3 years, and they don't want to put an end to it either. Middle East is on the edge. Does this give a free pass to
national order or whatever remains of it?
Right. Ambassador Bhojwani, this is the first, every year there has been a flashpoint for the last 5 years. This is the first flashpoint of 2026. What could this lead to for Latin America, for the global order in the next few months? This is not the end of it. There will be ripple effects.
Yeah, but there have been flashpoints all over the world, even in 2025, which continue. The Ukraine war is still on. You've got flashpoints in the Middle East. Look at Syria. It's on the boil continuously. Look at Gaza, what's happening. And if the Arabs had anything in them, they'd be fighting Israel all the time. So it's not as if things are at peace. You've got, for instance, on the Thailand-Cambodia border, it's just, there are flashpoints everywhere. There's a lot going on, a lot of interests at stake. To the point about will this give a free pass to China and Russia, I think also we need to consider what capabilities these countries have. China can stomp around in the South China Sea and say, host a couple of boats of the Philippines and so on and so forth, but it cannot prevent US ships from sailing through the South China Sea. The US is the preponderant world power. And I think this is the most dangerous thing. today. It's been the most dangerous thing for at least half a century because the US has just dominated world affairs, and it has done so in a manner which is extremely hostile. Let's not forget the Iraq war. And you don't even have to look at Iraq,
Right.
look at Libya, look at all over the world. I mean, the US has been brazen. Even the Yugoslavia invasion was not sanctioned by the United Nations. It's just that Europe went along with it. So the whole world thought, all right, fine. So the US and its allies go in wherever they want, and the UN is left to clean up things. And then everybody says, all right, let's